Yes. Well, today I'm talking to Andrea Edwards, and she's a business-to-business communication specialist who focused on authentic and real communication, and who has just written a book on courage. And actually, around 3 weeks ago, I've talked to, I think, one of your friends by now, because you've connected, Carrie Phibbs, and I've talked to her about talking to strangers. And even then, Andrea, before we started our talk, or before we started actually recording, we talked a lot apart from the interview. And she already mentioned you, and she said, oh, you should also talk to Andrea. And now, obviously, researching courage for 39 Ideas for Life, I just had to reach out and connect with you. You've written 2 books, if I'm correct, on social media, and you've recently added a book on courage, and that's titled Uncommon Courage. And what I really like is, as it's stated, it's written as an antidote to all the fear, the rage, and the diversion in the world today. And I think that, yeah, we can use a lot of that actually today, because there's a lot of that going on. So let's dive in. Andrea, thanks so much for making the time today and to talk to me. If it's
great to be here.
Yeah, I'm happy about that too. If it's okay, I'd like to start with a personal question, because you come from a somewhat different background and you've written a lot on social media, communication and the like. But what is your personal story? What happened that inspired you to write this book on courage titled Uncommon Courage?
Well, it's, Uncommon Courage is the journey of my life and the realizations on the journey of how do you sort of get yourself under control, right? So I see so many people who are so angry with so many people, and they hold on to this anger, and I watch it eat them alive. And I learned how to let go of anger, and I watch people who they struggle with their personal confidence, or the voices in their head overwhelm them. I watch people who don't take this courageous steps that they need to. They don't take the chances. They're faced with a couple of paths, and they stay in the comfort zone, but this comfort zone isn't where the growth lies, as you know, as a world traveler, right?
Yeah.
And, I've spent my life just wandering and taking risks, taking chances. I don't know what the outcomes are going to be. And I don't actually seek certainty. I just seek growth, and I seek experience, and I seek the unknown. I always have. And I love to travel, and I've traveled by myself for most of the time, and put myself in all sorts of weird and wonderful situations. And I love that, because even if it's a bad experience, there's growth that comes from the bad experience, and there's strength that comes from that bad experience. So it's like I'm inviting people on the journey of my life. So it's not a book about me, but it's just about these realizations and these epiphanies that I've had, both in the way I've sort of lived my life, but also from a professional perspective as well. So, I started off my career, my first job, I was a musician in the Australian Army.
Yes.
I did music and archaeology at university, completely useless, but I loved it.
Yeah.
And then I got a job running communications for an aerospace company at the age of 23, which was a fantastic job. And I love the industry. It's very exciting. It's very high tech. And then I kind of started wandering, and it was communications and public relations the first half of my career. And then the second half of my career, I moved into marketing services. And then that sort of evolved into content marketing. And so that's the stories that businesses tell. And when content marketing first started to become a concept, for me, it really spoke to me, because for the first time, I felt that there was a genuine way that businesses could market to their customers in a way that was focused on the customer, and not the other way, which was just the false, the aspirational marketing, the buy more, have more, get the latest, which is not good for Earth, right? So content marketing really sort of spoke to me. But then I realized that, there was a time when I was working with Microsoft, and all this amazing content was being created, but nobody was sharing it. And I was trying to get my colleagues, come on, guys, we've got to share this beautiful content. And then that's when I came up with my next business, which is by myself, which I basically teach big companies, their executive teams, their sales teams, all of their employees. It's a philosophy that I call social leadership, and it's about being present on social media with a mindset of integrity and service, and that you're delivering value to your audience. So it's not a lot of the stuff that we see on social media, which is very sort of narcissistic and egotistical, and look at me. It's always delivering value to the audience and giving to your community, and being a decent human, but also mastering these platforms. We've got the most powerful communication platforms ever created, we all have at our fingertips this access to this information.
Yeah.
And the negative voices, the divisive voices are dominating. They're clustering together and they've got a bigger footprint than they've ever had before versus just one or two people in town. Mm-hmm. Now it's like they're coming together in groups and they have a right to be there. And I don't deny their right to be there. But there's more of us that don't think that way. And so my job, my mission, my intention in everything I do is to get everybody else to come on board and participate, because if we don't, we let them control the global narrative. And right now, the global narrative is very, very negative. So Uncommon Courage is all of these pieces of me together. So it's professional, it's personal. I've got 7 topics that I talk about, and but the most important work we've got to do is within. We've got to find our contentment within. We've got to find our balance within, so that we can go out there into the world and be the people that we're supposed to be, and be brave and be courageous and take the biggest steps. Yeah. Do the things that we want to do. We don't worry about, the trolls and the bullies. We don't worry about them, because we're on a mission to create a better future for all of humanity and all life on Earth. So it's a really big sort of book. It's a big topic. It's a fat book.
Yeah. And it has a workbook with it, big workbook.
Yeah. So you can some people love that, just sitting down, writing, capturing their thoughts. But yeah, so it's my contribution at a time where the world's really struggling. People are struggling. There's just, the people are in despair. I mean, there's the majority of humanity is struggling in a much, much bigger way: starvation, malnutrition, famine. But for the rest of us who come from the developed world, the wealthier world, we're struggling for different reasons. It's the relentlessness of this time. There's a quote that's been going around for a while: we're all in the same storm, but we're not all in the same boat. Mm-hmm. And so I'm not talking to the people who are struggling with famine and despair and being sold into sexual slavery. I'm not talking to them. I'm talking to everybody else, because if we can sort out our mindsets, we can understand that it's a time for great compassion and empathy, so that we act and we create a world that brings everyone into it, because we need to do that, because what we've created is so destructive that we're destroying the foundations of our ability to live on this planet. Yeah. So we've got a lot of work to do. So that's kind of a very quick summary of what I'm trying to do.
Thanks a lot for that. Actually, you said some interesting things that I want to touch upon. First, you say there's a lot of anger, and I see this in the world today. There's a lot of frustration, which causes anger, and also dissatisfaction with ourselves, I think, in many cases, because we're not being our true self. And this is also an element that you touch upon in your communication strategies: to be real, to be authentic. So did you also experience yourself this anger and this frustration as kind of as a trigger or an inspiration to kind of want to write this book?
No, not really. So I'm a bit of a curious one. So as a young teenager, so definitely there was anger. When my parents got divorced, when it finally sort of happened, I was 16. So I went through a period of quite intense anger. And then I went traveling through the Middle East I think I was 21, 22-year-old. So a blonde young lady traveling through the Middle East obviously gets a lot of attention. So I punched a lot of people at that time, which felt great. But what it gave me was silence that time. It really gave me some silence to go inside my own mind and work out my own thinking. And so one of the chapters in the book is like, get out of your life. And that ability to really step out of your life, like I know you've experienced when you've traveled around the world, to be by yourself, to be lonely, to be excruciatingly lonely, to be on the road by yourself for months on end when you just don't really have a conversation with any other people and nobody speaks your language, right? Yeah. And then when you finally meet someone that you can converse with, you never stop talking, right? But so that was the thing that helped me deal with the anger, but the trust in myself, it's not a confidence thing, that the real authenticity, the working out who I was, that happened at a much younger age. Yeah. And it's something, so it's not something I had to work at. It's just something I've built on. So, and I don't know why it happened. Like none of us really know why we are like we are. I see in one of my sons, he's got the same qualities. So I think it might just be a natural sort of part. But yeah, I try and help people who are they're built up so many layers of pretending to be something or pleasing something, especially when I live in cultures like I'm living in now, where it's a lot of making the family happy, making the elders happy.
Yeah.
But when everybody's making everybody else happy, they're not really focused on themselves. So I pay attention to that a lot. You know, like you, I'm very curious, so I'm always watching. I suppose if there's one thing I do, it's I watch humanity. I pay attention. Yeah. And anger is, you know, it's, you know, you look at the divisions that are going on in the world, and it's just like, whoa, you know, and nobody's taking a step towards each other. Yeah. Families don't talk to each other, and we've got to fix that and trust.
Yes.
You know, we don't trust anyone. We don't trust anything anymore. And that's so divisive. Conspiracy theories are off the charts. Yeah. Misinformation, my God. You know, so, you know, we've got the ability to sort of really stand back and just look across it and just go, well, this isn't good. This isn't going to help anything. You know, and we look back through history, and people don't pay attention enough to history. And we're at a point that we've been in many, many times through history that lead to world wars, but we can't afford another war from an environment perspective. We need to move forward. We need to raise consciousness around the world, and we've got to overcome the divisions to do that and fix what's broken in our societies, the things we've accepted for too long. You know, we can do it.
Yeah, I think you said something interesting regarding your own anger as to how we as people can deal with our anger. And I think what you by chance kind of discovered is that you were traveling in a place where you couldn't talk to anyone because nobody understood you. What happens in that time for this prolonged solitude, I know from experience, then in the end, we start to talk with ourselves. We first hear a lot of bullshit and excuses. And at some point, because of the prolonged solidarity, we, in the end, we have to get beyond our bullshit and see the real self. And that results at some point, I also know from experience, to letting go and getting over our things. And actually by experiencing them, instead of by being stuck in our excuses and pointing the finger at other people. And this is also what happens, I think, a lot in the world today, is we're all pointing at each other. We all have reasons to say, oh, no, that's his or her fault. But actually, the thing we can control is, to some extent, at least, ourselves and our mind, if we practice. And what you said also at the beginning is the contentment within. I think that's a really interesting thing. So I want to hear more about that. And I know from experience that you can reach that by overcoming the difficulty within yourself. So what could you say about this contentment within?
I think the contentment, it's so interesting. So when just before we go into that, the silence in dealing with yourself. So most people are terrified to face themselves. Yes. They can't cope with their own minds. But if you actually can give yourself the time, and it's not a couple of days, the longer you, and the more mixed up you are, the longer you need, right? Yeah. But what we've got to work out is what do you think? What are your ideas, and what's been put there by other people or institutions, right? Yeah. So it's your family's philosophies, the religion that you're part of, any institution that you are brought up in, a school or a sort of a collective group of thinking, right?
It's not necessarily you, it's put upon you.
Yeah. So it's programming. We're all programmed. Yes. And what the silence gives you is the chance to say, well, wait a minute, I don't think that. So you sort of, I always describe it as you pull these tendrils of thoughts out and you have a look at them and go, is that mine? Yeah. Do I like it? Do I want it? Do I want to keep it? Or do I want to let it go? Yeah. And so that, to me, and it's a forever process. Once you start, you've got to keep going, and you'll go through periods where you just can't do it anymore and you have to have a break. But always make sure you come back to it. And so by doing that, first of all, by getting all these thoughts out of your head that don't even belong there and working out who you are, that's a really great place to start. And then the next stage, I think it's to really start to pay attention to your emotions. Yeah. So if you're feeling this anger all the time, you know, towards somebody in your past or something, you got to go and look at it. You got to go and look at, why do you feel it, you know? And then if you can do it, and a lot of people can't, but the people that we admire the most in the world, the Nelson Mandelas, right? Those sort of people, they've looked at the people who have done them the most harm, they can love again, you know, and we can all be those people. And it's all about just going inside and working out all these emotions, but always pay attention to your emotions. Yeah. What's going on inside you? When you feel jealous of someone, look at that. So many people project onto other people the way they're feeling. And men do it more than women, especially with anger. But really look at the feelings, you know. So the pandemic to me has been a great case study of male anger. And it's something that we need to be conscious of, and we need to heal it rather than judge it. So domestic violence has been off the charts. Why? Because there's all these men in this excruciating fear because their life is out of control. Their jobs are at risk. They can't take care of their family. I mean, obviously some of them are assholes, no question about it. But men in fear are a dangerous thing, and that gets launched around the world, and we've got a lot of that going on. So if you want to move towards contentment, you've got to start paying attention to your emotions, and that's the real self-awareness focus that I've got all throughout the book. And it's really paying attention within, and understanding your triggers. Like being jealous of somebody to me is a crazy thing. Why would you spend your energy being jealous of somebody versus spending your time focused on what it is that you actually want to achieve that is making you jealous in the first place? So we waste time on unnecessary emotion when we should be just turning. It's like, are you an Asterix fan? Did you ever read Asterix comics when you were a kid?
Yeah.
I'm a huge Asterix fan. My friends in Europe call me Andrix, right? I love it. And one of the, every time the Gauls fight the Romans, there's this big sort of tussle and there's dogmatics on the side. And basically what's happened is there's all these people in the middle having this fight with the Gauls, right? And the rest of the world sort of standing on the outside. We're looking at the fight and we're focusing our attention there. And what we need to start saying is, where do we want to go? And let's focus our attention there. We've got to accept that that's not going to go away. And we have to accept that that's going to be part, like the negative divisive element is going to stay, but we give it too much power because we give it all our focus, right? Where the attention goes, the energy flows. It's one of the great laws, right? Yeah, right. Yeah. Okay, right. So we're all got our energy focused on the negative. And if collectively enough of us could turn away and say, all right, we don't want that. What do we want? Let's envision it and let's go and create it. And that to me is the path that we're at now. We've got an option. We've got two forks in the path, dystopia or utopia. We've got to start walking towards utopia, running towards utopia, really. And it's on all of us to do it. We can do it. And I really believe we can do it. My faith in humanity is always strong. I mean, like I've traveled the world. The majority of the people that you meet are amazing. They're beautiful. They're fantastic. They want to take care of their family. They want to meet people. They want to, people are good. And there's a percentage everywhere.
They go, yeah.
Everywhere. Yeah. So, let's focus and move towards what we want for all of humanity and all life on earth. And we can do this, but we need enough of us to believe it. And people don't believe it. They've lost hope. Yeah. That's the other thing. We've got to get hope back. And to me, it's about that. Like, come together. Come on, we can do this. We have to do it. We have to do it for our kids. We have to do it for our grandkids. We have to do it. If you're under 60, you are going to be severely impacted by the climate crisis. That's a very large percentage of the global population that's facing catastrophe, ruin, war. Yeah. And the leaders of the world aren't making the right decisions. They're signing defense agreements.
There's a thing to this, or there's an element to this, and this is actually the overwhelm. And you speak about this in your book also. There's so much, and these topics, like for instance, climate change, they're so big. So we don't know where to begin. And another example, obviously, which we're all faced with, is the impact of COVID-19, and how this is affecting and inhibiting and limiting our lives and our freedoms and destroying our economies, etc. So what role does courage play in dealing with this overwhelm, and how can we do this?
Yeah, overwhelm is a really interesting topic, and it's something I've been talking about a lot, right? So I don't get overwhelmed by the knowledge economy, which is what we're in, right? Mm-hmm. There is so much out there, but you've got to be able to stand back from knowledge. You've got to stand back from information, and you've got to start looking at the patterns, and you've got to start looking around and go, what's really important? Like, the whole COVID thing's been a great example of people sitting in the moment of the news. And it's like anything to do with COVID, we're always 2 weeks behind. Yeah. And people are sitting in the now of it rather than looking long-term. Like, what does it mean long-term? And, just recently I've been talking to a bunch of people. I'm like, we are in the last legs of this, unless another worse mutant variation comes out, we are in the last legs, but we've got a minimum 6 months, and we've got a longer cycle, but the worst of it, right? Yeah. So you've got to get your mindset around the time. You've also got to look at everything from a big picture perspective, but stand back, look at the patterns in the news. look, if you're caught up in conspiracy theories, I'm not going to convince you not to be. But if you're feeling that they're a little bit tantalizing, like there's some warning signs. Like if somebody puts something out there and say, watch this before they take it down, that is a sign that you're about to dip into a conspiracy theory. And a whole bunch of the stuff that comes out, I always look at it and watch it because I'm curious. And the way they do it, it's all consistent. And it's hard because people go, well, but why would people do this? Why would they put information out like this if it's not true? And we don't always understand the motivations of people for what they do. I don't even think they understand the motivations themselves. But anything that divides us, anything that's not moving us forward collectively, especially with COVID, right? We've got to come to a consensus about the best way forward. And not everyone's going to like that. But right now, when you look around the world, the vast majority of people say vaccines are the way forward. So if you're an anti-vaxxer because of whatever reason, you might be in a minority in the long run because that's the way it's going to be, Even France, which really surprised me. Macron basically said, if you want to go to a restaurant, you want to go somewhere, you've got to be vaccinated. And apparently it's been a huge success and it's driven people to be vaccinated. So in a country like France, which is anti anything, right? They like to, it's an independent country, right? They've done it. But there's also been other protesters who've turned up to beat up the protesters. Yeah. Because in France, they've recognized that the protesters are part of the problem of keeping it going. So we're at a pretty interesting phase. But stand back from information, work out what's important. Don't be so distracted by everything that's going on. If you can try to get your emotions out of information. So if you're reading something and it's drumming up a lot of fear in you, that's a sign that you're caught up in the emotion. So if you're sitting in a lot of fear, try and work a way out of your fear, because fear, if you can't operate from fear, you can't exist when you're in fear. You can't make decisions when you're in fear. So if you're in fear, work really hard to get out of that and try and get yourself into a neutral place, an objective place.
Then where does courage come into this?
Well, I think it's all about courage because people feel comfortable sitting in fear because it's something that they know. But being courageous is about sort of looking at the world through, you look the world in the eyes. Like when you start to really face up to the climate crisis, which you mentioned earlier on, right? You need to accept that you are going to go into a very, very, very deep depression, because when you start really facing it, you will be overwhelmed, you will be horrified, you won't believe what's coming at us if we don't act. But you need to go into that. You need to have the courage to face it before you can come out of it. And once you come out of it, that's when you go into action. And I always say to everyone in my community, if you've got the guts to go into it and face it, I'm here to help you come out the other end. But I can't stop you going into despair, because it is very frightening. I know what it's like. I've faced it. So it's courage. It takes courage to face the world square in the eye and go, okay, this is where we really are. Now, how do we fix it? Yeah. And believe that you can.
So how would you define courage then, in your words? What is courage?
Courage is just the ability to stand up, speak up, show up, and be your true self, be who you are, no more layers, and show your face to the world and say what you think needs to be said to create the change that you want to see in the world. That to me is what courage is all about. I mean, there's a broader definition of it, of course, but sure. It's just, show up, stop hiding, stop closing your eyes, stop putting your fingers in your ears and pretending that hoping it's all going to go away.
In spite of the paralyzing fear that you sometimes might experience. Yeah.
It's also turning your eyes away to the truth that's around us, So courage is facing the truth. One of the things that really frustrates me being in Thailand is I'm watching the absolute economic devastation that's happening in the developing world. People are starving. Famine is going to be hitting 20 countries. When we did Live Aid back in the 80s, it was one country, 20 countries in famine, three officially confirmed based on how the UN defines it, right? Our entire global supply chain is built on the back of human suffering and environmental suffering. We keep turning our eyes away. Every time we buy a fast fashion item, we're buying into an industry where there's so much suffering. And those ladies that make those garments were abandoned right at the beginning of the pandemic.
Same in Myanmar.
Yeah, exactly. In Myanmar, Sri Lanka, Bangladesh, Cambodia. And what happens to a woman that's abandoned in a country like that? She's often the primary breadwinner. So she potentially could be sold into sexual slavery. It's absolutely. And, you know, and why do we buy the clothes when there's so much suffering in that supply chain? Why do we accept that? But mobile phones,
face it,
right?
We ignore it completely, and we don't even want to hear it or see it in many cases because it becomes very uncomfortable.
So yeah, it is uncomfortable. So let's face it. Let's face the discomfort and say, we don't want it anymore. I don't want it anymore. Yeah. You know, like, why can't we do that? That's one of my biggest struggles is, why can't we just face up to what we've gotten wrong? Yeah. And we can look all around us. We can see what we've done to the earth. Okay, so let's fix it. Let's change it. Let's build a better society. You know, we can do it.
Yeah. Yeah, it's not easy, but the way is to face it head on, to look it in the eye, the things that we're afraid of. Yeah.
Yeah. That's courage, right?
Yeah, no, absolutely. It requires a ton of courage. What in your view is the relationship between, because we've talked about the part where you have what you experienced during your travel, where you actually visit yourself because of the silence and because of not being able to talk with others, and to have that introspection, basically. So, and you also mentioned that it's about, and also your work in the communication domain, it's about being your authentic self and showing you yourself as you are instead of what the world expects of you. So what is the relationship between vulnerability and courage in this regard?
Yeah, so vulnerability is a really interesting topic. And one of the things that the feedback that people from my book have said is they're amazed, surprised, pleased, how vulnerable I've been in putting the book together. But to me, I have no fear of being vulnerable because I don't pretend to know everything.
It's the only way to be is be yourself.
I don't. And I'd rather sort of, you know, I'm in every situation, I'm happy to be vulnerable. I'm happy to share any experience I've gone through if I believe that it's going to help another person either go through that same experience in a different way or recover from an experience. So for me, I don't understand why people are so scared of being vulnerable. You know, men obviously struggle with vulnerability. I think women do too, for different reasons. But it's like we're scared, we're giving too much power to other people by giving other people our truth. But actually, I think we give ourselves all the power when we're vulnerable, because when you're not pretending, when you're not covering anything up, when you're not hiding anything, when you're not trying to remember who you're supposed to be based on who you're speaking to right now, you can just be fully present as yourself all the time whenever you show up. Yeah. So it's, to me, vulnerability is the secret to contentment. And I've got nothing to hide.
Yeah. But still, for so many people, we have, and myself included at times, I have this expectations of the world that I allow to lead me in some ways, and that I don't show everything because I'm afraid of X, Y, Z happening. Or I guess a lot of it comes down to a fear of not being loved, you know, for if you show your true self. So how can we cultivate that? I mean, I know I'm actually teach vulnerable leadership in university in Switzerland. So I know a thing or two about this topic and done some work on it, but it's not as straightforward for many people I know.
Yeah, but I think that observation, so I didn't realize you'd done that, you do that professionally. So you should answer this question rather than me, but
I'm also a beginner in vulnerability, I have to say. I mean,
yeah. No, it's cool, and it's good on you for speaking up about it and speaking out about it. You know, the fear of being loved or not being lovable because you're vulnerable. Yeah. I think we've got it the wrong way around. How can you truly be loved for who you are if you don't allow people to see who you are? You know, how many marriages fall apart because they don't let each other see their truth. Yeah. And then when they finally do see the truth, they realize they don't actually love each other. But, you know, I think if you can be truly who you are and be completely vulnerable, especially with a life partner, then you're going to have a magical partnership because you love that.
Really,
you love all of them, right? So it's a really interesting thing. But what about you? I mean, as a man, as a Dutch man as well, right? Is it? I've got lots of great mates in Holland, and I know the men can be they they can come across a bit abrupt, but some of my dearest friends are Dutchmen.
Direct, yes, but
yeah, direct, but also abrupt. But yeah, I know what you mean. I know the difference that you're talking about too. But from a cultural perspective, I mean, I grew up in Australia, right, where Australian men are supposed to be rah, and that wasn't my experience growing up. Like my dad wasn't like that. My brothers aren't like that. But culturally, Australia's got this reputation. But for you, what do you feel like when you look across Europe? How far away are we still from men? Sort of, because I think if men can tap into their vulnerability, it can be actually the cornerstone of changing the world.
Mm-hmm. It's a big question. Actually, I agree. I think men and women, if we can show up as ourselves and our full self with our faults, our insecurities, our half-finished sides of ourselves, if we can just be that, and instead of pretending to be something that we're not and making other people wrong for not recognizing that unfinished part of ourselves or the part that we're pretending to be, I think the world will be a much better place if we can indeed, like you say, also with regard to two partners who can actually love each other for who they really are instead of what they're pretending to be or what they think the other person wants to see.
Yeah.
I've lived in Asia the last 6.5 years, so I've just come back to Holland, to Europe last April. I was in Switzerland in March before, but so I'm not sure if I'm an expert on the current status of vulnerability within European men, but I think, and maybe this is also because of the people that I resonate with, I guess there's more of that showing up, but maybe that's also just because of the circles that I'm in. I don't know if this is a societal or a European thing, but I imagine it's the same what you said before and what I say a lot. People that know me well, they get tired of me saying it's where focus goes, energy flows. And the same is true for vulnerability. If we do more work on ourselves and if we have more courage, if we can muster more courage of being ourselves, obviously that invites other people around us to do the same. So it's like, it's a positive oil spill, if you will,
Positive oil spill.
Like we get more of it if we share more vulnerability.
Absolutely. The relationships are deeper, and you'll meet people that, I mean, I've got this one friend in Australia, and she transforms the hardest man into a softie, because underneath everyone is soft, right? And if we can help each other see the beauty that's within us, and if you can see the light in another person, tell them. I've met so many people, they're magical and they don't see it in themselves, and they're full of these insecurities, and you can see it. It's all on the surface, right? And it's like, oh, don't worry about all that nonsense. Go within, because what's within, that's where your magic is. And if we can help each other see our magic that's within, and we unlock each other. But and I'm, living in expatriate worlds like we are, you tend to have similar thinking people around you when you live in a culture where, there's every nationality on the planet is probably living in Phuket, and we're all in the same boat, and we all connect with each other. And then, of course, there's different types of communities where you don't necessarily cross over to, but everyone, we immediately connect with each other. We're much more vulnerable. And then you go back into a society which you're probably experiencing right now, the adjustment to going home, which is very, very difficult, right? Because people can be a little bit more stuck.
Yeah.
They're still friends with the same people they went to school with. They're not necessarily inviting new people in. Yeah. And, that makes it very difficult when you've been traveling around the world to go home, because you just don't feel like you've got any, it's very difficult to make new friendships. It's very different. It's very difficult. People don't want to hear about your experiences.
Well, I learned a lot from Carrie, so I think I'm doing okay in that regard. And I've moved to a different city, so I don't know anyone here, but I've made
good
friends already. It's been a good experience, actually.
Yeah, nice. But I've had friends who've gone home to countries like Holland, and they've really struggled for a while. But yeah, we can stay curious, stay open, meet new people, always bring new people into your life, especially if it's someone that you think, if you have a problem with black people, but you don't have a black friend, make one. If you think you have an issue with Muslims, make a friend. get to know them, understand them, be open, like never be closed to any type of person based on any idea that you've got. And I think that's a huge.
And especially, and this is again with facing your fears, especially the people and the groups and the situations that you're normally fearful of, actually seek them out and discover that there's nothing to be afraid of when you get to the person behind that image that you have.
Yeah. I just remember it's only a tiny percentage of people in the world are assholes. The rest are great.
Yeah, it's true.
We keep putting out energy over there.
They have a good side behind that facade of being an asshole too. Yeah.
Oh, absolutely. And like we're all broken. We've all been broken by the society, and it's about working out how do we just fix the pieces within that have been broken. And like I said at the beginning, how do we reject the ideas that don't even belong to us anymore? When we hold fast to an idea, like, the whole LGBTIQ, equality, marriage, all these people are against it. I'm like, how the hell does it even impact you?
Yeah.
Like, if they're allowed to get married, how does it impact you? Why? Well, it's the institution of marriage. And I'm like, well it's hardly a good example based on heterosexual marriage and divorce. Like, what's so important about it? It doesn't make any sense. If it doesn't interfere with your life, why do you have to get involved? And what's going on in America, trying to reduce access to abortions for women? What the hell are they doing? Let women do what they want with their bodies. It's like, I've never met a single mom that's having a good time. Like, just let women make their own choices. It's like simple. Stop trying to determine how women dress. Let them do what they want to do. Like, everyone's involved in everybody else's business. Like, just stop it. Like, if you want to live like that, go and live like that, but let other people do what they need to do. Most of us kind of work out an equilibrium where everyone's kind of coexisting in peace, but there's all these extreme right and extreme left that are trying to interfere with this. There's, the majority of people, if you look at a big circle, we're all in this middle.
But I imagine that if people are very much focused on other people, which is the case in these examples that you give, I imagine that they're not being able to reach themselves or not dare to reach themselves. So then the next thing is to look at the other person and find fault with them if you can't do the work with yourself. I mean, it's a repetitive thing in history, in life, and in relationships also.
When you're unhappy with yourself, you'll project it onto other people if you're not willing to face yourself.
Yeah.
And if everyone could start facing themselves, and it's not necessarily a pretty time,
for that we need courage.
Yeah, exactly. And it's you if you can do it, if you can face it and have the courage to face yourself, and warts and all, because some people have had some pretty ugly lives, and it's lots of reasons for that. They've been horrible people, they've been horrible family members, whatever. There's a reason that they are like they are and what they've done. If they could just say, oh, okay, wait a minute, I want to be a better version of me. Yeah. All right, so I've got to go and look at what I've done, and I've got to go back deep and find out why I've done what I've done.
That's not working.
Yeah, there's a movie called The Wisdom of Trauma. Have you seen it?
No.
Yeah, if you have an opportunity to have a look at it, and I think it's a really important piece of work that we all have trauma, and our trauma comes from our parents' trauma, which comes from their parents' trauma, and it all sort of goes back. But we never healed the trauma. And anyone who can't deal with the trauma, so people who become addicted to drugs or sex offenders, or they're all victims of trauma. But by not healing the trauma, and by putting those people in prison or sort of making them the worst in society or whatever, we're not healing the trauma that exists after generation after generation after generation. And I think if everybody could watch that and finally sort of realize that that's something that we could do that can make a huge difference.
I'll definitely watch it.
Yeah. But how we raise our children, how we raise our boys, how we raise our girls. Yeah. I was just reading a report. I think the Wall Street Journal is doing some pretty deep reporting on Facebook at the moment. But the amount of self-harm and body harm that young teenage girls are experiencing because of the influence of Instagram, right? So here's a platform that's doing great harm to young women. We need to fix that. But we need to fix that. Yeah. When I was a young teenager, I realized the magazines, because obviously didn't have social media then. Every time I read them, they made me feel bad about myself. Yeah. So I stopped reading them.
Facebook and all these platforms, because we're all looking at this best polished version of ourselves, but it's not the real.
Using the filters to make ourselves look younger, and then you meet someone face to face, and you're like, "Whoa, that's not the person I was expecting." Why would you do that? Like, just be yourself, wrinkles and all.
Yeah. One thing that struck me, and I want to hear more about this. You mentioned that, or you suggest that we can use the current turmoil that's in the world today as a springboard for action. How can we do this, and can you share some examples of this?
Well, everyone's been talking about build back better, right? And it's all those horrible terms. Oh, got to pivot, all that sort of nonsense, right? We need to stand back and look at the future and say, we can't continue with the fossil fuels industry, but we can't exactly take the fossil fuel industry out of our global economy, because then we would be in a catastrophic economic crisis. However, if we don't take it out of our society, then we're also going to be in a crisis. So we have to stand back and say, right, what can we do? What can we do quickly that's going to make an impact? So the most obvious choice is get methane under control. So methane's in our garbage tips. It's in like the oil and gas refineries. They've got all these holes where methane's being released that can be fixed. And obviously, what do you call it? In what's the methane that's coming out of Northern Europe? I hope you edit this.
You mean the natural gas, or?
No. God, I've just gone blank. You're going to edit this, right?
There's not going to be editing, but it's okay. We don't have to be perfect and have all the answers.
Oh, good. No, I know the answer. I've just gone out of brain dump. It's the old. It's where all the vegetation that's been under ice for.
Okay, yeah.
The methane dragon in Siberia.
Actually, I don't know. I'm not familiar.
Permafrost. Sorry, permafrost.
Okay, yeah,
yes.
which is now defrosting. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So which is increasing the release of methane. So it's one of these things that we can do, right? So there's a lot that we can't do, but there's a lot that we can do. So that's one of the things. The fossil fuels industry as a whole, right? So we've known that this has been coming for 30, 40, 50 years. We need a new global economy, and so as an example, California almost went bankrupt during the pandemic because people weren't driving to the petrol stations buying petrol, and so the tax at the petrol station basically goes to the government. So without people driving their cars, the state almost went bankrupt, right? So it's so insidious in the global society, in the global economy. It's how we get around. It's how we do everything. And that hasn't, I know there are economists, and I don't have the answer because I'm not one, talking about it, but we've got to look at how do we do this as quickly as we possibly can. But then on the other side, every single one of us can say, right, I'm going to do my part. I'm going to change what I do. I'm going to change how I live, and then share those experiences. Like if we can all share what we're doing. Just yesterday, there's a final bit of composting I hadn't been able to work out. So I put it up on Facebook. Who knows how to do this, right? And all these people jumped in.
That's actually my business.
Composting?
Yes, we built large industrial composting plants. And
right.
What I thought when you were looking to find permafrost, obviously the agricultural sector is a huge methane producer. And I'm very active in this field of reducing the emissions. And also in terms of waste management, reducing emissions from waste, especially in Asia, if we're going to the landfill instead, processing the organic fraction. There's a lot we can do there,
Yeah, stopping plastic, right? Stopping all the big FMCG brands have to stop. Composting, like locally, community, globally, we need to start doing it. Start getting all of the pesticides out of the agriculture. I mean, the agriculture industry is massive, right? Food waste on every step of the supply chain. There's so many big things, but as individuals, what we can do is do our best bit, clean up our lives, do whatever we can to reduce our impact, especially those of us in wealthy countries. But we also need to be talking about it. We need to be sharing. We need to be talking to our family, talking to our communities, sharing online. And then once we get our house in order, build communities where everyone's getting their house in order, and then ripple that effect out so that we get more effect. We need to be voting for people people who are really going to step up and make the changes. And there's a lot of countries in this world with leaders who are not doing the right thing. They're not saying the right thing. So, you know, all of these things. So, but start with yourself, educate yourself, accept that it's going to be a hard thing to accept. It's going to be hard. It really is. And then go into action. But start at home, talk about what you're doing, share what you're doing, make your community aware. So in Asia, we've got a huge job on our hands to wake people up to what's going on. You know, we've got a huge job on our hands. You know, the average person in many countries in Asia uses 7 or 8 plastic bags a day. In Europe, they're already getting rid of plastic bags, right? The whole fossil fuel industry is dependent on the plastic industry, plastics need in our community to keep going into the future, right? So we've got some big battles to fight, but just start where you can start and do it in your home.
Yeah. So what you're saying is that have the courage to face these really big and intimidating issues that we experience in the world today. Start them for yourself, start small, but have the courage to do it and then share it. And this is your social media and communication background, I think. Share it and to have other people be aware of it, that you're doing this. And by that, hopefully having, like I said before, this positive oil spill where we have other people infected in a positive way to also start doing it. And by that, change this big and audacious situation.
Yeah, and believe that what you do matters, right? So a lot of people are without hope, you know, but every step that we individually take opens our eyes up to, once you start to face your own contribution, your own personal footprint, you go, whoa, wow. You know, you start looking at every part of your house, how you shop, where you shop, what you buy, you know, support local, don't fly. You know, I'm sitting in Phuket and I can have steak from America or Australia, but I can also have steak from Thailand. So first of all, try and reduce your red meat intake if you can. Go vegetarian or vegan if you can. But if you can't, like, at least don't add the emissions of flying it over from another country onto it. So you start to really start thinking and looking at the world in a different way yourself, which starts to build up. And then you start to talk about it more and you start to share it more. And then other people go, oh, wait a minute, I can do that. Because people are looking for a place to start. They're always looking for a place to start.
Sometimes these things are so big and so overwhelming, and that we don't, we don't see what we can do.
Look in your fridge. Start there. And then look in your wash, and then where you wash your clothes, how you wash your clothes. Look at that, the detergent you use. You know, then look at that. Look at the amount of plastic waste that comes out of your house. Just start at home. Get a compost if you can. If you've got the facilities. If you live in an apartment complex, come together as a community. Put an industrial solution in. If you live in a bigger community, if you own a restaurant, get the entire strip of restaurants. Get them all to contribute together into the coffee waste, and then go and plant it in a forest. You know, just everyone come together and do their bit, and believe that collectively we can make a difference, because it's the lack of hope that's killing people right now.
I think an important part of this is also, when you start on this journey, is to stay committed to what you're doing, and to stay truthful and believing in that it's possible to instill positive change. In your book also, you speak of inner commitment. Can you talk more about that? I'd love to hear about it.
Inner commitment.
Yeah.
I mean, you know, I never make a decision unless I'm absolutely committed to it. So, you know, I'll just talk about it from a social leadership perspective, right? So recently I launched a new podcast and a live stream at the same time. I've been thinking about doing it for 2 years. And I didn't hesitate to do it for any other reason than it was a commitment, because once I start, I have to keep going. You know, the voice that I'm putting out there into the world, you know, I'm committed to doing it for as long as I'm alive, because I'm fighting for a future for my children and for all children. So inner commitment, it's that real, you know, once you've made up your mind and you're committed to a path, then really being resilient through the long term. Too many people put their toe in and they step out. They put their toe in and they step out, and then they'll say to me, I'm not being very successful, Andrea. I'm like, well, because you're not in. You're either all in or you're not. So yeah, being really, really committed to your path and your course of action. And once you intellectually have decided the path, and then your heart and soul connects to that intellectual commitment, then it becomes your mission. Then everything that you do is driven by purpose and intention, and then you are committed, because it's a deeper level of commitment. It's not just, if you're just going into everything from an intellectual perspective, you're not going to make it.
Yeah.
If you're just going into it from a heart perspective, you're not going to make it.
Yeah.
You need to bring it all together.
I like what you say, that once you have that commitment, it goes to a mission, and from there, there's a purpose underlining it, and it kind of solidifies itself in a way. But
it feeds you. You know, you're not, and it's also why you don't care about trolls or people criticize. You don't care about that. You're like, oh, I don't really care what you think, because you're not invested in this like I am. I'm confident in why I'm doing what I'm doing. I've invested in the knowledge to do what I'm doing, and I'm on a path of change. Yeah. And if you want to join me, great. If you want to criticize me, go for your life. I'm not paying attention to that. I'm moving forward. And if you want to come and join me on the journey, or start your own and I'll join you on yours, and we can support each other. So, you know, that's, I suppose, you know.
How do we get to that point? Because that commitment, it's preceded by that decision where you say, okay, you know, I'm not just dipping my toes and I'm really going in. How do you get to that point where you can say, okay, and many of these things we have to commit and decide before stepping in, before taking the risk.
The biggest challenge I always see in the world is self-belief. People do not believe in themselves. They struggle so painfully with it, whether it's showing up as a voice on social media or just in life.
Yeah.
You know, why would people care what I've got to say? Why would anyone care what my point of view is? Those sort of comments. And from the CEOs I've worked with, right across an organization to individuals, it's always the same. And not one person on the planet has the experience that you have. Not one person. Nobody sees the world through your eyes. You are the only person with your unique perspective. So I would say, if you're saying things out there in your world, and you know, if you only change one mind, it's worth going out there and speaking up. It's not about having millions and billions of followers. A lot of people are obsessed with the popularity. But I've never been sort of focused on that. I'm obsessed with the message. And if people like my message, they'll come with me. If they don't like my message, they won't come with me. So it's not a numbers game. It's a mission, right? So believe that what you say matters. And if people are listening to you, and you know when someone's listening to you, their eyes sort of open up a little bit more when you speak. They lean into you when they want to hear what you've got to say. If you've had that experience where people are really listening to you, then you've got something that's worth hearing. And don't worry about if it's only that one person. It's still, one person is the beginning, but you have a point of view that's valid, and believe it. And don't let anyone tell you otherwise. So one of the other topics I talk about in the book is external influence. And this is other people telling you how to live your life, how to think, giving you advice, pushing you in a direction that they think is right for you. So I have this concept, you've got to trust in your own counsel, your own wisdom within, and really tap into that. Really try and listen to your own voice that is in there. It's speaking to you all the time, but our society has been built to push that voice down so we don't pay attention to it. And so it's always external voices that are the noisiest. But you've got to start creating the silence to listen to yourself, whether that's through meditation or sport or walking on the beach with your dog, whatever it is, however you do it. But you've got to listen to it, and you've got to believe in it, and you've got to give it more importance, because you always know best. You can ask, you know, I do it, I've done it myself. You ask 100 people for their opinion on something, and you kind of like, and nothing's really resonating, because you've already got the answer within you, and you know what the answer is. You've just got to be willing to hear it. And it's always there. So listen to your wisdom within.
Yes, I think, yes, absolutely. And I think an important reason why people are very eagerly trying to convince us sometimes, it's actually because it's driven by fear. Because if they can convince you, it validates their reality, which actually they feel uncertain about. Otherwise, why would they have to preach it so much? You know, I think that's something to be aware of, that if we hear this really strong advice, maybe we can take it with a grain of salt and realize that's probably coming from a place of fear instead of actually love or abundance. And I think that's...
And sometimes it is coming from a place of love. Like I had this one example, this amazing person offered to coach me so that I could move into the executive ranks of a global MNC. And I was incredibly grateful for the offer, but I had to say to them, that's not what I want.
Yeah.
I don't want that. I need to create my own path, and it can't be part of these sort of organizations, because I don't like the politics of this business. I don't like the way people talk to each other. I don't like the way people treat each other.
Yeah.
And me moving into those ranks isn't going to change that. I have to change who I am to get into those ranks, and I'm not going to do that. And I'm happy to, and I've always been very, very happy with that decision. But the person that offered it, I think my saying that to them actually changed the way they then thought about their future as well. So, but again, it's trusting your own wisdom within. I knew that I didn't want to do it. When I was in my 20s, I wanted to be the CEO of a global company. I didn't know which one. That was just an ambition I had. Yeah. And then as the years went on, I went, no, I don't want to do that. Why would I want to do that? You got no life. Yeah. But yeah, trust yourself, believe in yourself, hear yourself.
Yeah.
The
healing part is a very, very important element or important step. And I think going through the experience instead of running from it is the critical step in that healing process.
Yeah.
Yeah. I have one last question, Andrea. And I always like to close with this question. It's maybe a difficult question or a somewhat challenging question, but it's, what question about courage didn't I ask, which I should have asked? What is a question about courage that I should have asked, but I didn't ask?
I think courage is one of these terms, it's one of these terms that's starting to be bandied around a lot, and it risks moving into a cliche, like authenticity does. Yes. Vulnerability as well, right? So there are three terms that people are using a lot. Yeah. And I think, so probably, how do we avoid doing that? How do we avoid these really important conversations about these really important topics? How do we stop them becoming a cliche? Because they are three really, really meaningful things. Courage is within you. It's within every single person, but it's a muscle that you need to build. And every single step of courage helps you to build more courage. And, I've got two teenage boys, they're 13 and 14. And I'm constantly sort of pushing them into places that they're not comfortable to be in. Yeah, but right. I know that they need to do it. Yeah. Because when I was a teenager, I was doing it. And I'm not forcing them. I'm trying to help them understand that it's important that they can step into it, because if they can step into it, they become more courageous. And the younger that you can achieve this, the more you can achieve in your life. But let's not make it a cliche. It's not a cliche. We need courage, we need vulnerability, and we need authenticity. Yeah. To me, they're like that's the Trinity today, right? Yeah. Because they're the path to. We need to raise human consciousness without going through another global war. And every war we've ever gone through, we do raise human consciousness. But we need to do it for the future of humanity and all life on Earth. That's why we need to do it. And people don't like to talk about consciousness, especially in a business context, because it's seen as too fluffy. But really, that's where we are. We need to rise up to a new level and it's going to take a lot of courage, because we have to leave behind so much of what we created. And people are comfortable with what we created, but that's what's kind of gotten us to the point with what we're at. Yeah. So we have to have the courage to let go. But yeah, let's not turn it into a cliche. That would be my request.
I like what you said in that regard. And indeed, it's not about talking about it. It's about being and doing. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah. Don't be scared of the incredible power that you have within you, because you do, and we all do. And the people who are content have tapped into their power. It doesn't mean they've gone out and been the most famous rock star on earth. It means that they've worked out who they are, and they're grounded in themselves. So I always say, you ground yourself in your values. Nobody can shift you off your values when you ground yourself in them. That's where the path to contentment is. So do the work within. Don't be scared of yourself. We're all broken. Yeah. We've all had bad experiences, some more than others.
And they build us. They actually make us who we are. Do the healing that's required to get to that growth. Yeah.
I talk about suffering in the book, and I start off by talking about my rejection of organized religion. Started from the fact that I couldn't stand the amount of suffering through the message. And then as I went out into the world, I saw all this other suffering, like people who went through the Blitz in the UK. They're in their 80s now, right? And they're still suffering. It's still part of their existence. It's always been part of their life. They've never been able to move past suffering. But the other thing about suffering is it's where you get your strength from. It's where you get your resilience from. So if you have suffered, that's your strength. So dig into it. Dig into the suffering and
hardship.
Forgive anyone that made you suffer as well, if you can.
Yeah, it's actually a gift.
That's in you. And yeah. Suffering is definitely a gift. Yeah. So we've talked about lots of topics in this, haven't we?
Absolutely. Hey, thanks so much, Andrea. It was an absolute pleasure. I love talking to you. I definitely will stay in touch, and I'll be with Carrie also to give her my feedback, because it's been a great.
Yeah, nice. I love having a conversation that's 100% off the cuff, and we're just whatever comes up and makes sense. I think it's you don't have those opportunities very often, right? A lot of too much is structured these days.
Yeah, we have to let go of trying to control everything. It makes
but speak from the heart, right?
Yeah.
And good luck in your mission. I think it's a wonderful mission, and your 40s are a fantastic decade of wisdom and empowerment. But then your 50s are another step as well, where it's even a different mindset again. So you never stop growing, and that's the beauty. If you're stuck, get unstuck and do whatever it takes to get unstuck, because the world is. What's that?
I said time doesn't wait; it just continues.
Yeah. If it's not always changing, then you're going to get stuck, and you're going to get bored, and you're going to get stuck in your thinking. And go and visit a developing country, and go and help somebody. Go and work with the charity. Do something good in the world, but don't ever get stuck, because none of us are right. None of us have got all the answers. It's a journey of change, and it's brilliant. Life's brilliant.
It is, absolutely. Thanks again, Andrea. It was a wonderful conversation, and I wish you a beautiful day in Phuket today.
You too.
Yes. Stay in touch.
See you, Tom.
Bye.
Bye.